I'm going to be talking to you today a little bit about a project that I've worked on for about 3 years, and it came out in 2015. It's called Outgoing. Came up with a clever name, and I created it at a time when I was going out a lot, and I just kind of kept running into some things that I'll explain in the talk, but I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So traditionally my work is mostly transportation and heavy information data visualization work. This is an example of something that I did when I worked at my last job at a regional plan association. We came up with a mega region plan, and I was the data visualizer for all of it. So things like high-speed rail corridors, and then park plans and transit maps. So it's and if you want to see more of what I do normally, it's at that site up there, jferzoco. I have a really good name for domains, and so check that out. But way back in like 1996, I did this. And this was like the first thing I really did that was a map. And it was a friend of mine was in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco at the time. And a friend came to me and he's like, you know, all these gay guides that are out there are just not that good, and I want to make a really good one. I was at school at CCA, and I was the only really the only person doing information design. Like now, everybody's doing it, but like I was really kind of groundbreaking at that point, and I started doing mapping, and I was working for a company called Reineck & Reineck that I did that map on the right with. That was a bus map for San Luis Obispo. And so I had some practice in doing mapping. It wasn't that great. This map I could critique for an hour about all the little things I did wrong, but I was young, I was learning, and it was great. And so it was basically a book, you know, a hot guy on the cover, great times. And then like all the neighborhoods in San Francisco I just kind of laid them all out. And it was really great because it was about this big, fit in your pocket, and you could just carry it around and you could figure out where all the gay spots were. So fast forward to 2015, you know, 20 years later, I was hanging out, my local bar was, and kind of sometimes is, Nowhere Bar on 14th Street in New York City, where I live in Brooklyn now, but I lived in Manhattan then. And I was talking to this guy, Wallace, and he was telling me all these stories about these bars that were so amazing in the 70s and 80s, and I'm like, I wasn't there, you know, it's kind of making me a little envious. And so I decided, like, and he kept saying this, gay bars were so much better in the 70s and 80s. And I was like, I don't really, I mean, I knew that there was a scale that was different in the 70s and 80s, and because, you know, you heard stories about like, just everyone was gay and they were just doing all this shit. So, and then you get like, and then you get pictures like this, and so I started looking for sort of references about like what was really going on. And so, you know, you get pictures like this, which looks amazing, but, you know, I don't know how different it is from now, really, you know, except for this guy. I don't know what he's doing there. But then if I look even further back, there's like some great periods of history, like lesbian New York in the 30s was supposed to be this really rich time where, like, it's just so good. And, you know, all along everyone's had a lot of pressure and a lot of troubles. And Provincetown in the 40s is just like, I've read some books about Provincetown in the 40s, and I just love thinking about the parallels between their lives and our lives. And I don't know if that better or worse is a really good word to use. And then if you look way back to the 1890s, like, this is risque back in the 1890s. Like, this was porn right here with a full suit on. So, you know, thinking about the 70s and 80s, they were definitely, it was like lightning in a bottle because everybody was really closeted. Like, if you think about it, in the 50s, it became illegal to be gay and work at the federal government. And then it became illegal to be gay as a contractor for the federal government, and then basically went to every business, and so it kind of forced gays to be independent contractors and do whatever came naturally. Like, that's why we have stereotypes of florist shops and such. So, you know, there was a big movement to just come out, and everybody came out at once, and so there was a burst of energy, and that was probably contributed to why it was better in the 80s. But I wanted to know specifically how many nightlife spots, and I'm focusing on nightlife for a specific reason, are there now, and how does that compare to previous decades and eras? So the reason I'm focusing on nightlife is because I think that's where a lot of the rich movement in the gay culture has come from, because we were kind of forced underground, and so we would go out at night. And that was where a lot of the movement and a lot of the movement in our community really happened, and that's where we solidified. So, and I actually have a friend who theorizes that we were the first sort of neoliberal society because we were forced to pay money to spend time together, and at which I'm sure this does not apply just to gays, but and by the way, I just want to be clear, I mean LGBT when I'm saying gay. It's shorthand for me because I'm a gay man in my 40s and I just have always said it, but I definitely am being absolutely inclusive with all of this. So the nightlife is more important for this project. It's not more important in general. The daytime is just as important, but for this project, I focused on nightlife. So the goals were to map the past, present locations of LGBT nightlife, use it as a tool to understand where our community is and was spatially, and collect stories and use them to give youth a historical context for where they are in order to help them to feel normal and not feel outside. So this is what I made. And honestly, it's a pretty simple map. It's basically points on a map. And it's got a time slider. You can search for a bar. You can hover over and you can see massing. And if you click on a bar, you get a little bit more information. You can use this on your phone. It's mobile responsive. So if you want to do that right now, I won't be offended if you're on your phone. And so, it's just an exploration tool, but it got a lot of press. The first thing that happened is it ended up in the Atlantic when I wasn't even done with it. And so, because my friend Sarah Goodyear was watching me do this, and she put out, like, in my first early drafts, and then it hit Joe My God, and then it got on BuzzFeed. It got really, really huge for about 2 weeks, and I had really enjoyed the press. It was wonderful, and all the questions. So I got to answer one of my questions really fast, which was, did the period between 1970 and 1980 have as many or have as many bars as 2010 to 2017? And the answer is way, 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 way more, like a lot more. And so that got me thinking. That got me thinking about what else we could figure out about this. Basically, looking at spatial neighborhoods, and this is going to be part of the future of what I'm doing. I've had to slow down on the project a little bit because of work, which I'm sure happens to every one of us. But I want to talk a little bit about the process. I want to talk a little bit about why it's kind of important to do this, and then about the future of it. So, how I made it. Data, which I'll talk about where it comes from and how it's entered, into a Google spreadsheet. I use CARTO, though this could actually, and I'm saying this in case anybody wants to replicate this project, it could be a GeoJSON in a lot of these different formats, on a leaflet map with jQuery for filtering, and then a Mapbox-based map. And then it's served as a site from GitHub pages with a custom domain. It's super simple. This is really not that difficult a site to make. Though at the time in 2015, I was a lousy coder, and it was harder. So now I'm a little bit better, and I'm getting some help from some people who are even better than me. So on the map right now, there's locations in nightlife or after dark places: bars, clubs, bathhouses, cruising areas, sex clubs, certain shops that support nightlife, after-hours restaurants, and cafes. And I kind of want to be careful about the alcohol requirement here, because not all gay life needs to have alcohol in it. So cafes are very important to that. And then events that were sort of fleeting moments, parties, clubs, and gatherings that are more important now. Now, basically, there are fewer bars, as we saw, and events tend to be like a Monday night at a club. So I wanted to make sure that was able to be brought in. And so we have 1,100 locations in New York City and environments. There's a little tracking on the type going, so you're going to see them smashed together. So we have 1,100 locations in New York City and environments. Actually, I have Albany and some Long Island locations in there. So I'm kind of hitting wide when I get research. So back to the results. 1970, 1980, 2070. You can see a significant difference in bars. And why is this important? It's because gay neighborhoods are important. Gay neighborhoods are where we meet each other, where we hang out together, where we hook up, where we do all kinds of great things. And there's an element of safety to it. So when you're in a gay neighborhood, it was probably more important in the 60s, 70s, and 80s to be kind of closer together, because there was some violence and there was a lot of prejudice against the gay community. But now it maybe is not as important, but we have, this is just as an example, these are some of the gay neighborhoods that exist in case somebody wouldn't know what they were. Christopher Street, West Village in New York, Castro in San Francisco, and West Hollywood in LA. So a lot of people are wondering where they've moved, where the gay neighborhoods are concentrated. And to me, the bigger question is whether there will be one at all. And there are a lot of theories about why they're sort of disappearing. So cities are more costly. Young people can't move in and just get an apartment. So it makes it harder to say, I'm going to live in a gay neighborhood, because it might just be cost prohibitive or not exist because nobody can gather. We're integrating really well, socially and spatially, because we can be out and we can get houses, and housing discrimination is lowering, not gone, but it's lowering. Dating apps are making the dynamic change so that you don't have to go out to meet somebody. They can come to you and order like seamless, which is really changing the dynamic. And the truth is, we've always met through virtual means. And this applies for gays and lesbians, but this is focused on the gay experience, specifically the gay male experience. We used to meet through hobby magazines, create classified ads, so you have like thinly coded hobby magazine like ads in both of those things. BBS systems in the 80s, 1-900 numbers in the 80s. Anybody remember those? Yeah, good. AOL, and then finally, and you can see it just expanded like crazy in the 2000s and 2010s, all these different ways to meet. So, of course, we're going to not be going to bars as much, right? So, the future of this project is kind of exciting. I have a lot of mapping is changing enough to make this really, really interesting, and I kind of put it on pause, knowing that I needed to ramp my skills up a little bit. But I'm going to focus on the sources for a second. So, the primary sources that I used to get the actual points on the map were scraped from some terrific texts: Gay Metropolis, Gay New York. This is an 1800s story of an androgyne that lived in the West Village or around Bleecker Street, just all the places we went. So I would go through these books and just scrape out every location and add it to the map. And then Times Square Red, Times Square Blue is a great book about the decline of Times Square and what was going on. It's very graphic, so just be aware if you're going to pick it up. And then crowdsourcing, talking to people like Wallace, and then first-person interviews, but then also gay guides. So these are books, just like the one I made in 1996, that you would get when you're going into a neighborhood to understand where it was safe to go. And so you would find it, and you would say, like, okay, I can go here, I can go there, and they give very specific guides on where you will and will not get harmed, where you'll be accepted, or where you won't be. So there are tons of these, and I went to the New York Public Library, the Gay Center, and a bunch of other places to get all kinds of these guys, and I took pictures of them in the places, just like this. And so you can see there's a list of probably 20 there. And so one of my friends got on a plane, took all my pictures and just transcribed them all the first time. Totally manual process, not ideal. And then we have other things like this, this is by the lesbian switchboard. So you would basically come to New York, you would pick up the phone, and you would call and you say, I'm at the corner of Bleecker and Broadway, and I want to go to a lesbian bar. And they would direct you to this they would use this guide. Yeah. What's that? Isn't it great? It's super manual. And these were hand curated by people that went out in the field and understood. So this is actually the gay one. This is not the lesbian one on the screen, but. And so all this great information, you would have a conversation. So it was a one-to-one conversation. And then you can see the addendum on the right there. So they would update them and they would add things. So it was really, really well done. It was basically like Outgoing, but in paper form by a team of 10 or 20 people that would just be maintained. And then the phones were constantly used 24 hours a day. So when I get those books, I have to find the source, I have to scan it or photograph it, capture it, for later use. So I have a store of a whole bunch of these, and some of them I haven't been able to go through. Without OCR, go through the photos and you log every entry, marking the ones you've done so. Blah, blah, blah. With OCR, you read the image and do a ton of cleanup, not ideal either, and then add cleaned or transcribed information to the spreadsheet. So this is what OCR looks like. You can see it's not too bad on really high quality images, but once you start getting like some crazy stuff like this, I mean, you can see the results there on the right. That's not going to work. So I'm looking at, I've just this month, I'm using Google AutoML Vision API to scan these, and the quality is so much better, and they've done some really good work, and I'm working on training a model in order to scan them reliably. And what will that enable me to do? I can process my whole backlog, which would be great. I can add new guides, which I find, so I can start seeking guides out again because I'm intimidated by finding them at the moment. And new cities can start coming on. I've got Chicago, New Orleans, and LA that all want to do this. And it's a location, I've built it so that it's location agnostic. You can just add new guides, and then you can just shift the view, because it's a leaflet map, and you just change that line of code to a different latitude and longitude, and they show up. So there's a lot of potential here to make this a national experience, which was part of my initial intent, but then, it's fun to try to boil the ocean and not do it. So, and also there's also a redesign coming. So we're using web frameworks, specifically Ember. I'm working with Matt Gardner at Department of City Planning in New York, and we've spent a lot of time just kind of talking about what we're doing, and he's building the whole thing in Ember, and he's teaching me how to do it at the same time. I want it to be vector, and I think we can enable a lot of stuff, potentially using things like CARTO VL, hey Mamatha, and to make it a little bit more, to do a little bit more exploration and expression of the data. And then I've done a little research into the use cases that people are trying to find. So number one, people come to find a specific bar. The first gay bar they went to is generally the thing that they want to find. So they search for King, and King bar comes up, and they experience that a little bit again. The deeper filtering. So I want them to be able to look at a range of times, or search by lesbian or gay or trans, and find specific things. There's this whole section of mafia-owned bars that I would love to. I need to do. It's hard to get the research for it because it's so obtuse, but I would like to be able to kind of sort by mafia-owned and see the history of that. And it kind of the problem here is that all of this is really, you could research forever and never get a complete set. This will never be a complete data set, so it can be frustrating. Current building, what's there now in the street view, many gay bars were in buildings that were torn down because there were gay bars in them, so they were erased, and I want to tie them to a building now and start looking at those stories a little bit. Tours and experience, there were clusters of circuits that gay men specifically did, but I think there was a lesbian element here too, in the 30s specifically. So like there would be 5 or 6 bars that everybody would go to on a Friday or Saturday night, and they became like pathways. And so I want to do tours of those so that you can kind of relive almost like a story map experience. And then source focused views, so you can see all the bars that were in a source. And then you can start doing sort of gathering and era building. And then you can see I've just done some improvement. I want to have it be a little more data focused, not too data focused, because I want this to be a human experience and not a dashboard, because that's not really what this should be. But we're going to put some things together. So my favorite thing about this is it's inspired a couple of new projects that I really, I'm super proud that this happened, and I've worked with these people just a little bit to get them started. So this is New York City LGBT Historic Sites Project. This was such a beautiful project. And this is really taking the daytime version of what I did. They came to me and they just asked me where I failed, which was a really great question. They're like, what would you not do this time? And I kind of coached them on how I made it and what I did, and they took it and they just ran with it. You should definitely check this site out. It's really good. I wish every city had one of these so that we could understand the LGBT presence in cities over time in a more thorough way. I've still yet to add some of the data, like this is not on the map, but I'll be adding it in the next round. So make sure you check this out. One of my favorite things that came from this is the New York City Daddy Map that was done by Elliot Ramos, who works for WBEB. What is this, Chicago? WBEC? WBEZ, yeah. So he grabbed all the taxi data in New York and focused on the Eagle, which has a line of taxis that like sits right in front of it, and he tracked where every one of those taxis went in the city after it left the Eagle between midnight and 5 a.m. So this is where the daddies live. And so it's really fun explorations like that. The problem is that TLC stopped doing lat long in 2016, so we have to base everything on 2016. And so we're starting to do a little data science. I had wanted to do it before this, but you know how it goes. So, but this crosses some privacy barriers too that we're very cautious of. But I want to know where the spatial aggregation of gays are in the city. And I've lightly talked to Scruff. Scruff is a dating app for bears in the worldwide, and they're in New York City. And I've talked to them a little bit about how to work with their data, and everyone's just so scared of it. Grindr had a breach a little while back, and it was just not a great thing. So I think that's probably not going to happen. But we're looking for other signals in the data. And then finally, I taught a class at Columbia in GSAP called One Block, or One Block in Brooklyn, actually One Block in New York City. All the students picked a block and kind of dove deep into the research about that one block and through open data. It was an amazing class. One of my students took the current bars on my map, and I'm updating them for new bars as they come out. and basically did the spatial aggregation for where the taxi rides, this was back when they still had lat longs, and looked at where people were going. So, and he designated the census blocks that had the most taxi rides in them. So he did this is one, and this is men and women. And the conclusion that he came to on this one was that Hell's Kitchen obviously is a huge deal, but for the lesbian side, there's definitely an income thing going on. The bars that are open are on the edges of the highest income areas for women. And that's a national problem. Lesbian bars are closing across the nation. There are so few of them left, and there were so many back in even the late 90s and early 2000s. So I think there's a project here. I think there's something that you can do to better understand the how and why. And I once you start unpacking it, I think it's going to open up issues of gender pay, and I think it's just really, really interesting. So I need a month off to do this, to do some stuff, but that's about it.
Thanks, Jeff. That was super, super informative. I have an 8,000 questions, but I'm going to wait. If anybody has... Okay, Kate, go.
Hi. I love watching this project grow. It's amazing to see this happen. And especially when we live at a time where this is barely coming into mainstream culture, that, you know, gays have a history of thousands of years. Whoa, wild, right?
Yeah.
They've always existed. And the second, my actual question is, how do you think this is a tool to be used to study essentially gentrification according to these historically gay places? Because I live right next to the Castro.
Yeah.
And it is such an ongoing debate in that neighborhood, and I know in the West Village as well.
Yeah. So traditionally.
Yeah, can you just repeat the question?
Sure. The question is, how is gentrification affecting this, essentially? The dynamic is that gays move into neighborhoods where they can afford it, because we've always been paid just a touch less than everybody, more than a touch less. And so you had to move into places that were sort of up and coming or renewing. And the West Village became gay because the West Side Highway came down. And I'm sorry. It was because the West Side Highway was there, and it was basically a trash heap, and nobody wanted to live there. So the gays moved in, made it an enclave. When it came down, the rent started going up, and so we basically fill in spaces that nobody else really wants to live in, and we're running out of those spaces. And so the Castro is completely different now than it was back when I lived there in 1990, and I don't know the answer. It's putting a lot of pressure on the gay community to actually have a place. I don't know that we can. I think that, but I also don't think we're the only community. I think there's a lot. This project is applicable to a lot of different minority communities, and it could be a model for anything. There was a Spanish community representative that came up to me and said, I want to do this for the Spanish community on 14th Street in Union Square. So I think gentrification is affecting everybody, and it's just I don't know. Everything's getting expensive, and that's it.
Josie, you have one more question.
Yeah, can you talk about how you dated the points in the first map? Was it a range of operation, or was it the date of the document that you found them in?
Yeah, that's the hardest part of this, because you don't have solid opening and closing dates. I have to basically assume. So if I see a bar in one guide and I don't see it in another one, I assume that it closed. And then if I don't see it in one guide and then I see it in another one, I assume it's open. And then there are documentations in various places. It's like forensic investigation to say, like, there was a bar in 1977 that I went into, and you know, if you hear a story, it's a lot of really deep digging, and most of it's blurry, except for the current, like the past 10 years I can have with any security.